The mountain lodge corridor was silent except for the sound of a child gasping, a wet, strangled sound that meant death was measuring the distance between heartbeats. Giovanni Moretti, 48 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered in a tailored black suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, was on his knees. His hands, the same hands that had signed 23 execution orders in the past year alone, were shaking so violently he could not grip his phone. His son, Marco Jr., age 7, lay on the cold tile floor with lips turning from pink to purple to the color of bruised plums. The piece of filet mignon was lodged in the child's throat like a death sentence. Vinny, his lieutenant of 12 years, stood frozen against the mahogany wall. Franco, his second-in-command, was stammering into a phone that no one answered. The lodge staff huddled in the corner like birds watching a predator. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The most feared man in 3 states, the man whose word meant death and whose silence meant mercy, was absolutely helpless. Then the door to the service corridor burst open. The woman who entered wore a coat so threadbare you could see the padding escaping from the seams. Her hair was unwashed, pulled into a knot at the back of her neck. Her hands were calloused and chapped from cold. Her name was Vivien Vasquez, age 31 but looking 45. She had been standing in the lodge parking lot in the freezing Philadelphia winter, holding a handwritten cardboard sign that read "Medicine for my daughter, any amount helps." In her pocket was $2. 2. She did not ask permission. She did not hesitate. She did not think. She dropped to her knees, tilted the boy's head back, and wrapped her arms around his small chest from behind. One hand curled into a fist below his ribcage. She thrust upward with the kind of force that only comes from someone who has learned exactly how to save a life because she had to learn, because the man she loved was a paramedic before he died and before she lost everything. The piece of meat dislodged. It shot across the floor like a tiny, obscene projectile. The boy gasped. Then he coughed. Then he breathed, a ragged, desperate, beautiful sound of air filling lungs that moments before were collapsing into silence. Giovanni Moretti looked up at this stranger with the worn coat and the dirt under her fingernails and the terror still burning in her eyes. She was already backing away, her hand still shaking, her voice barely audible. Can he breathe? I think he's breathing. The boy was breathing. Marco Jr. was crying, gasping, whimpering for his father, and he was alive because a woman with $2 in her pocket had crashed through a door and chosen action over paralysis. Giovanni Moretti stood. He was 6'2". He had killed men. He had ordered the destruction of families. He had built an empire on betrayal and violence and the cold understanding that mercy was a luxury only the weak could afford. He looked at Vivien Vasquez, a nobody, a homeless woman, a shadow nobody in this city would ever notice, and something in his chest shifted like continental plates grinding beneath the earth. Vinny's breath caught. In 15 years, he had never seen his boss's expression change like this. It was like watching a statue understand it was alive. Franco lowered his phone. His hands had stopped shaking, but now his hands did not matter. Everything that mattered was happening in the space between Giovanni Moretti and the homeless woman who had just saved his only son's life. "What is your name?" Giovanni asked. His voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. "Vivien. I have to go. My daughter." I left her in. She was backing toward the door, hand still raised, trying to make herself smaller, invisible, non-existent. "She's in our car. She has a fever. I just needed to ask if anyone had. I didn't see him choking. I just heard." "Where is your daughter?" "In the parking lot. She's 7. Her name is Lily. She has a congenital heart condition and she needs surgery in 2 weeks. It costs $65,000, and I have." She looked at her hands like she could see the $2 written on her palms. "I have $2 and a list of debts that grows longer every single day." The silence that followed was not like other silences. It was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Giovanni turned to Franco without breaking eye contact with Vivien. "Bring the girl inside." Bring her to the medical suite. Now. Yes, boss. Vinny. Call Dr. Castellano. Tell him I need him here in the next 30 minutes. If he says no, tell him Giovanni Moretti is asking. Nobody said no to Giovanni Moretti. He turned back to Vivien. What is your daughter's name? Lily. Lily is going to be warm. Lily is going to be examined by the best cardiac specialist in Pennsylvania. Lily is going to be safe. You have my word. Vivien's entire body was trembling now. Not from cold. From something deeper. Something that looked like hope being born in a place where hope had gone to die. Why would you? I don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm just. Because the people who believe you are nobody need to learn what it costs to be wrong about you. It took 47 seconds for Franco to return with Lily, a small girl in a pink jacket 2 sizes too large, feverish and confused, her breathing shallow and irregular. Marco Jr. was crying for his father. Vivien was crying because her daughter was safe inside a warm building. Giovanni Moretti was stone again, but inside the stone, something was burning that had not burned in 8 years, since his wife died, since he learned that power meant nothing when the people you loved were slipping away. What he did not know was that his decision to help this woman would unravel the lies that held his entire empire together. What Vivien did not know was that the man whose son she had saved controlled every illegal operation from Baltimore to Boston, and that he never, ever forgot a debt. What neither of them knew was that somewhere across the city, Marcus Webb, her predatory landlord, was at that very moment changing the locks on the apartment she no longer paid rent to, throwing her possessions into the street. He was a thin man, 52, with the weak chin of someone who had built his life on taking advantage of people weaker than himself. He was also receiving phone calls from Cordelia Blackwood, a wealthy woman, age 49, with sharp features and sharper cruelty, who was systematically ensuring that no legitimate employer in Philadelphia would ever hire Vivien Vasquez again. But before any of that could happen, before the full weight of this moment could crash down, we need to go back. We need to understand how a woman as brave as Vivien Vasquez ended up begging in a parking lot instead of living with her daughter in a warm home. We need to understand the series of betrayals and losses and deliberate cruelties that had brought her to this exact moment, on her knees in the snow, with $2 in her pocket and a dying child waiting in a car. We need to understand why saving a stranger's son seemed easier than saving her own daughter's life. This is the story of what happened before. This is the story of how far a mother will fall before she finally learns to fly. 3 months earlier, in a studio apartment in North Philadelphia where the radiator clanked and groaned like a dying animal, Vivien Vasquez sat at a kitchen table the size of a showbox, arranging coins into piles. Pennies in one stack. Dimes in another. Quarters that seemed to catch the pale November light like tiny copper suns. Her hands were shaking. They had been shaking for weeks now, ever since the hospital called and used the word surgical and the word urgent and the word 14 days in the same sentence. Behind her, on a threadbare couch that had come with the apartment, Lily slept. 7 years old and small for her age, her breathing shallow and labored, each inhale seeming to cost her something precious. The child had a drawing taped to the wall above her head, done in crayon, bright yellows and blues and pinks. A picture of a house with smoke coming from the chimney and 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun. Vivien could not bear to look at it. The piece of paper lay on the table next to the coins. Not a list, not really. A handwritten accounting of the ways her life had come apart. Hospital bills from Lily's emergency room visit 2 weeks ago, $12,400. Funeral expenses for Daniel, her husband, who had died 6 months earlier when his work van was hit head-on by a delivery truck on I-95, $8,900. Credit card debt Daniel had hidden from her, discovered only after his death, statements showing cash withdrawals she could never trace, $23,100. And now this. The surgery. The thing that might save her daughter's life. The thing that cost $65,000 and needed to happen within 14 days, or the doctors said Lily's heart would stop trying so hard and simply give up. Vivien counted the coins again. $2,847 in her checking account. Everything else was gone. Everything. The car payment had been missed 3 months ago. The landlord had been patient at first, then irritated, then something else entirely. She did not have the words for what Marcus Webb had become. He arrived at her door the next morning at 7 o'clock, which meant he had been waiting outside since before dawn, which meant he had been thinking about this visit long before the moment he knocked. His knuckles hit the door hard. Not angry, but deliberate. The sound of someone announcing that they were about to take something that did not belong to them. Vivien opened the door. Marcus Webb filled the doorway, not with height, he was only 5'9", but with the kind of presence that came from knowing he could take what he wanted from people smaller than himself. Overweight, soft in the middle, with pale skin and wet lips and small eyes that blinked like a reptile's. He was wearing a polo shirt that stretched across his belly and khakis with a dark stain near the pocket. He smelled like coffee and something else, something sour that made Vivien's stomach turn. "Good morning, Vivien," he said. His voice was thin, reedy, the voice of someone who had never been refused anything. She did not invite him inside. "The rent will be paid on Friday," she said. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already decided how this conversation would end. "Actually, I've been thinking about this situation. The rent. Your struggles." He placed one hand on the doorframe near her shoulder, not quite touching her but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. "I've decided I don't want your money anymore." The hallway was silent. From somewhere in the building, a dog barked, then was quiet. Vivien waited. "I think we could come to a different arrangement," Marcus continued. "You're a beautiful woman. A widow. That's a hard situation. And I'm a reasonable man. I could help you. You help me. We work something out." Vivien stepped backward, and the door frame prevented her from moving further. Marcus's hand remained where it was, the fingers curling slightly, like he was testing how close she would let him come. "No," she said. "You have a child," he said. "Expensive child, from what I understand. Hospital bills. That's the kind of debt that follows you for your whole life. I could make that easier for you." "No." Marcus withdrew his hand. He wiped it on his khakis. "You have until Friday," he said. "Then I'm filing eviction papers. After that, you and your little girl will be on the street. Think about what kind of mother leaves her child without shelter." He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps hollow on the linoleum, disappearing toward the stairs. Vivien stood in the doorway until her legs would no longer hold her, then sank down onto the floor of her apartment, her back against the door, and did not move. By Monday, she had applied to 12 jobs. Waitress at 3 restaurants, including the Riverside Diner where she had worked 2 years ago before Lily was born. Maid at 2 hotels. Retail at department stores. Administrative assistant at a medical office. Childcare specialist at a daycare. Anywhere that might hire a woman with a high school diploma and a desperate smile. The first interview was at the Riverside Diner. The manager, a kind man named Steve who had employed her before, shook her hand warmly. The interview lasted 3 minutes before his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something shifted behind his eyes like a light being switched off. "I'm sorry," he said. "The position was actually just filled. I apologize for wasting your time." The second interview followed the same pattern. The third. By the 6th, Vivien stopped asking why. She could feel it in the shift of their expressions, the sudden coldness, the way they seemed to have received instructions just moments before she walked through the door. What Vivien did not know was that Cordelia Blackwood was making phone calls. Cordelia was 49 years old, tall and angular, with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, the kind of woman who had been beautiful once and had never forgiven the world for her beauty fading. She had been Daniel's employer, the owner of Blackwood Construction, and Daniel had refused to falsify accident reports when a structural failure had caused injuries on one of her job sites. The lawsuits had cost her company millions. Daniel had cost her everything. She had not forgiven Vivien for being his widow. For inheriting his life insurance. For still breathing when Daniel was gone. From her office on the 45th floor of the Meridian Tower, looking out over the Philadelphia skyline with the Schuylkill River winding silver below, Cordelia made calls to every business owner who had ever benefited from her wealth, her connections, her name on the right contract. Vivien Vasquez applied, she would say. I would advise against hiring her. She's a thief. She stole confidential documents from my company. We're preparing legal action. If you employ her, you'd be liable. It was not true. There had been no theft. But truth was irrelevant when wielded by someone with power. The calls began to land. One by one, the doors closed. The job offers evaporated. By Thursday, Vivien had been rejected from all 12 positions. She called the daycare to ask if they had filled the position faster than expected. The director's voice was sympathetic but firm. We have to be careful, the director said. Liability. You understand. Vivien understood. She understood that invisible hands were moving against her. She understood that someone had decided her fate. That same Thursday, while Vivien was sitting in the waiting room of the free clinic, hoping they might give her something for the exhaustion that had become a permanent part of her body, the school nurse called. Your daughter collapsed during lunch, the nurse said. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone delivering bad news. She's breathing, but her lips are blue. We've called an ambulance. You need to go to St. Mary's Hospital immediately. The ambulance arrived at the school in 4 minutes. Lily was conscious but terrified, her small hand gripping the paramedic's arm as they loaded her onto the stretcher. Her breathing was labored, working so hard it seemed to exhaust her. At the hospital, they ran tests. Echocardiogram. EKG. X-ray. Blood work. The tests took hours, and Vivien sat in the waiting room with her hands folded, listening to the fluorescent lights buzz above her head like trapped insects. The doctor who came out was a woman, mid-50s, with kind eyes and tired shoulders. She sat across from Vivien and did not smile. Your daughter's heart condition is progressing faster than we anticipated, she said. The hole between the chambers is enlarging. She needs surgery. Soon. How soon? Vivien asked. Ideally, before Christmas. No later than early January. Vivien felt the world tilt. What does it cost? The doctor's expression did not change. The procedure and hospital stay will run approximately $65,000. I don't have that, Vivien said. There are financing options, the doctor said. Payment plans. Charitable organizations that assist families in your situation. But we need a deposit of $32,500 before we can schedule the surgery. The administrator said this in a kind voice, the voice of someone delivering a death sentence politely. Vivien walked out of the hospital into the December night. The sky was clear. The frost was forming on every surface, each blade of grass crystalline with ice, each car window frosted white. The stars were sharp as broken glass. The parking lot stretched out before her, empty and cold and absolute. She had 13 days. She had $2 in her pocket, the last coin she had scraped together that morning. She had a daughter whose heart was failing. She had a landlord waiting for Friday with eviction papers. She had a future that was shrinking with every moment that passed. She did not know that on the other side of the city, in a penthouse apartment that occupied the entire top floor of the Meridian building, a man named Giovanni Moretti was about to learn that all the power he had built over 20 years could not save his son's life. She did not know that in 48 hours, her decision to step in front of a car on a mountain road would change everything about how that man understood the nature of power. She only knew the cold. The crushing weight of impossible choices. And the sound of her daughter's shallow breathing, recorded now in the silence of the parking lot, a sound that would haunt her through the next 2 days like a ghost that would not let her rest. The surgical monitor beeped steady and clean. 7 hours had passed like water, like blood, like a prayer that finally found its answer. Lily's small chest rose and fell beneath the bandages, her heart now beating with the precision of a machine that had been rebuilt by human hands. Vivien's fingers trembled as she held her daughter's tiny palm, afraid that any movement, any pressure at all, might undo what had been fixed. In the doorway, Giovanni Moretti stood motionless. He had not left the hospital. His men had urged him, reminded him of obligations, of the Valdez family waiting in South Philly, of the shipment delayed at the docks. He had dismissed them all with a single look. For 7 hours, he had sat in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and despair, and he had thought about his own son's breathing, about how easily that breathing could have stopped. Franco pushed a cup of coffee across the small table beside him. The steam rose in thin wisps. Neither man spoke. In 15 years of service, Franco had learned that some silences required no explanation. "In my entire life," Moretti said finally, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet, "I have never seen a person act without calculating the cost first. Not my brother. Not my men. Not myself." He lifted the coffee to his lips without drinking. She did not think. She simply moved. "And my son is alive because of it." Franco nodded carefully. What he wanted to say, that perhaps this woman had shown the boss something he had lost long ago, he kept locked behind his teeth. Some truths were too large to speak aloud. The doctor emerged from the recovery wing at 11:27 p.m. Dr. Castellano was 63 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and the exhausted calm of a man who had spent thousands of hours holding life in his hands. He found Vivien still sitting at Lily's bedside. The valve repair was successful, he said, and Vivien's body folded inward with relief so profound it looked like collapse. The tissue was more damaged than imaging showed, but we were able to reconstruct the flap. She will need follow-up appointments every 6 months for the next 2 years, but her prognosis is excellent. She will have a normal lifespan. She will run and jump and dance if she wants to. Vivien could not speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face like rain on a window, unstoppable and absolute. When she finally emerged from Lily's room 2 hours later, the hospital corridors had taken on that particular silence of the deep night, when the world seemed to pause and hold its breath. Moretti stood waiting, his black coat draped across his broad shoulders like the weight of everything he controlled and everything that controlled him. "She will be fine," Vivien said, and her voice sounded like someone waking from a long sleep. "Yes," Moretti replied. "She will." They stood in that silence together, and something shifted between them, not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The acknowledgement that some people move through the world differently. Some people act while others freeze. Some people save children they have never met. "I need to tell you something," Vivien said, and the trembling in her voice returned like an old sickness. "About my situation. About why I was outside that lodge." She pulled the crumpled cardboard sign from her jacket pocket. The letters were shaky, written in blue ballpoint pen. "Please help. Daughter needs heart surgery. Anything helps. God bless." Moretti took it carefully, as if handling something sacred. He read it once, then again, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your landlord," he said. It was not a question. "How did you?" "Because I understand how men like that think. They prey on the invisible. They assume no one is watching." He folded the sign into precise quarters. "Tell me his name." "Marcus Webb," Vivien said, and the name itself felt like poison in her mouth. "He owns the apartment building. He's been pushing for. The word stuck in her throat like broken glass. "I understand," Moretti said quietly. "You do not have to say it." At that same hour, in a downtown office 3 miles away, Marcus Webb sat at his mahogany desk and smiled. He had done some checking. The woman, Vivien Vasquez, had somehow come into money. Big money. He had seen her at the hospital, and beside her, a man in a coat that probably cost more than Webb's entire quarterly income. He did not know who the man was, but the way his men moved around him, the careful deference in their posture, suggested someone of consequence. Webb leaned back in his leather chair, and his reflection stared back at him from the window, a man of 52, with thinning hair combed carefully over his scalp and a small gold cross hanging from his neck, a cross he touched every time before he evicted a family or demanded payment for a service rendered in the darkness. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Cordelia," he said when the woman answered. "We have a problem. And I need your help to fix it." Across the city, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Rittenhouse Square, Cordelia Blackwood was just finishing her second glass of wine. She was 58 years old, immaculately dressed in designer clothing that draped perfectly over her toned frame, her dark hair set in waves that suggested a stylist on retainer. She had been born into old money and had multiplied it through careful marriages, strategic friendships, and a gift for identifying weakness in others. "Tell me," she said, and her voice carried the exact tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Webb told her about Vivien Vasquez. About how the woman had somehow escaped poverty through association with a man of obvious power. About how this threatened their arrangement, the careful network of rumors and social isolation that Webb had constructed to keep Vivien compliant and desperate. Cordelia listened, and as she listened, something cold and dangerous crystallized in her chest. She knew Vivien Vasquez. They lived in overlapping worlds, or so Cordelia had believed. She knew everyone worth knowing in Philadelphia. And she had made sure Vivien Vasquez remained beneath notice, invisible, unremarkable. The woman had always known her place. Until now. "I will handle this," Cordelia said quietly. "You focus on the landlord's situation. If she cannot pay her rent, if her living situation becomes unstable, she will have nowhere to run." She paused, swirling her wine. "And the child? The sick child will become leverage again." After she hung up, Cordelia stood at her window and looked down at the city sprawled beneath her feet, all those small lives moving through their small problems, unaware of how easily those problems could be amplified. She had spent her entire adult life ensuring that certain people remained exactly where she wanted them. Women without connections. Women without resources. Women without hope. The fact that Vivien Vasquez had somehow found a way out of that trap meant only one thing: Cordelia would need to rebuild the trap more carefully. Meanwhile, in Moretti's penthouse on the 42nd floor of the Meridian building, the boss stood in his study and made a series of phone calls. The first was to Castellano. The second was to a detective he owned named Morrison. The third was to a lawyer named Rothstein who specialized in situations that required delicacy and absolute discretion. "I need information on two people," Moretti said to each of them in turn. "Marcus Webb. Cordelia Blackwood. Everything. Financial records, business holdings, personal secrets. Anything that exists." He paused. "And I need it within 48 hours. Franco, listening from the doorway, felt the familiar weight of knowing what was coming. He had worked for Giovanni Moretti for 15 years, and in that time he had learned one simple truth: the boss did not forget, and he did not forgive. But this was different from the usual retributions. This was not about power or territory or respect. This was about a woman who had stepped in front of a car for a child she did not know, and about a boss who had finally understood that loyalty came in unexpected forms. By morning, Dr. Castellano had confirmed Lily's recovery was progressing ahead of schedule. Her small heart, rebuilt and restarted, beat with steadiness that seemed almost miraculous. Vivien had not slept. She sat beside her daughter's bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest, afraid that if she closed her eyes, the miracle would reverse itself. At 6 o'clock, Moretti appeared in the doorway with 2 large paper bags from a bakery. Inside were fresh pastries, warm bread, coffee that smelled like something from another world entirely. "You have not eaten," he said. "I'm not hungry." "You will eat anyway," Moretti replied, and there was no cruelty in it, only the simple insistence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Your daughter needs you strong. You cannot be strong if you are hollow." Vivien took a pastry because refusing seemed impossible. The croissant was buttery and warm and the most delicious thing she had tasted in months. While she ate, Moretti pulled a chair close to Lily's bedside and simply sat a day. He did not speak. He did not perform. He simply existed in the room with them, a powerful man rendered temporarily powerless by the presence of a child's survival. "Why are you still here?" Vivien asked finally. Moretti looked at her for a long moment. "Because you are still here," he said. "And because my son is alive. That creates a debt that cannot be calculated in any currency." What he did not tell her was that in the 2 hours before dawn, his men had already begun their investigation. They had already found the first threads of the web that Cordelia Blackwood had woven, the connections between her social influence and Vivien's impossible circumstances. They had found the contracts that Marcus Webb kept in his desk, the list of tenants he had targeted, the payment schedules he had arranged with city officials to ensure evictions moved through the system quickly. They had found evidence of 12 different crimes, each one documented, each one damning. But that information, Moretti decided, would wait. For now, there was only a woman and her daughter and the beginning of something that neither of them yet understood. The hospital monitor beeped steady and clean, and outside the window, the Philadelphia dawn broke pale and cold and full of beginnings that no one could yet see coming. 2 weeks later, Vivien pushed open the door to her apartment and exhaled like a woman who had been holding her breath underwater. Lily moved carefully beside her, still tender from surgery, but moving. The child's heart was beating stronger now. The fever had broken. The doctors had used words like excellent recovery and resilient, and Vivien had stopped counting the hours until catastrophe might strike. The apartment was cold, the radiator hissing uselessly in the corner, but it was theirs. It was shelter. It was enough. She was reaching for the light switch when she smelled cologne. Expensive cologne mixed with cigarette smoke and something darker, something that made her spine go rigid. Marcus Webb stood in her kitchen like he owned it, leaning against her counter with his arms crossed. He was tall and thin, with slicked back hair the color of old pennies and eyes like wet concrete. His suit was tailored, his watch was gold, his smile was a knife. "Heard your daughter got her fancy surgery," he said. His voice was smooth and practiced, the voice of a man accustomed to making people do what he wanted. "Must be nice having rich friends. Hospital bills don't pay themselves." Vivien stepped backward, pulling Lily with her. The child's small hand gripped her mother's wrist. "Get out," Vivien said. "You're trespassing." Marcus laughed. The sound echoed off the bare walls. "Trespassing? I own this building, remember? I own the roof over your head and the floor under your feet and every second you spend breathing in this space." He pushed off from the counter and moved toward her with the lazy confidence of a predator who had never experienced consequences. "You still owe me 3 months' rent. And I still want what I asked for." Vivien moved faster. She pulled Lily toward the bedroom door. Her fingers found her phone in her pocket. "You think some stranger paying hospital bills changes anything?" Marcus continued, his voice dropping into something uglier. "You're still broke. You're still mine. You're still going to do exactly what I tell you to do." Vivien dialed. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. 1 ring. 2. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Marcus grabbed the edge of her sleeve. "Don't you dare." Moretti's voice came through the line like the world stopping. "Vivien." "He's in my apartment," she whispered. "He won't leave." "He keeps saying," her voice fractured like old ice. "He's threatening me." The line went silent. Not empty, but full of something cold and dangerous stirring in the darkness on the other end. "Put him on the phone," Moretti said. Marcus took the phone before she could move. He held it to his ear with the smug expression of a man who had never learned to be afraid. "Who's this?" he said. What came through the speaker was not quite a voice. It was something deeper, something that made the air in the room feel thin and difficult to breathe. "You have 60 seconds to leave that apartment and never return," Giovanni Moretti said. His words were calm. His words were absolute. "Or what happens next will be the last mistake you ever make." Marcus laughed. The sound was brittle. "You think I'm scared of?" The line went dead. Marcus tried to dial back. His hands had stopped steady. His face had gone the color of old newspapers. He tried the phone again. Again. Then he heard the engines. Deep, rumbling engines. Multiple engines. From the window, Vivien watched. 12 black SUVs pulled up to the curb in perfect formation. 12 men in dark suits stepped out, moving with the kind of synchronized precision that belonged to people who followed one person's orders without question. They wore identical expressions. They wore identical watches. They wore a kind of absolute certainty about how the world worked that made everything else seem small. Marcus Webb left the apartment in 45 seconds. He left at a run, his tailored suit jacket flapping behind him like the wings of a panicked bird. The men in black did not have to touch him. They simply walked toward him with their eyes fixed on his face, and that was enough. He collapsed into the back of a car. Within 90 seconds, every black SUV had disappeared into the Philadelphia traffic, leaving only the fading sound of engines and a kind of absolute silence in their wake. Vivien held Lily against her chest. The child was trembling. "Mommy," Lily said. "Are we safe now?" Vivien wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe that Marcus Webb represented the end of something, the final predator who would ever look at her and see an opportunity to take what was not his. But she knew better. She knew that there was another predator still circling, and this one was far more dangerous because she wore a diamond necklace and a smile that had convinced half of Philadelphia to believe lies. That smile arrived at her door the next morning. Cordelia Blackwood stood in the hallway with her blonde hair perfectly arranged and her perfume expensive enough to cloud the small space. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Vivien's entire apartment. Her nails were manicured. Her face was composed. Only her eyes were wrong, they glittered with something that looked like hunger. "I heard about your daughter's miraculous recovery," Cordelia said sweetly. "I wanted to discuss Daniel's accident. There are some legal matters that I thought we should clear up. Insurance fraud allegations can be so messy, don't you think?" Vivien's entire body went cold. "My husband did not commit fraud." Cordelia's smile sharpened like a blade being honed. "That's not what the paperwork I'm filing tomorrow will say. The construction company's safety records were falsified under his watch. Witnesses have already given me statements. Of course, if you wanted to sign a simple document admitting that you encouraged him to falsify the reports, just to protect your daughter's future, then perhaps I could convince the authorities that the case was less clear than it initially appeared." "I won't do that," Vivien said. Cordelia's mask dropped. What remained underneath was not a woman anymore, but something with a human shape. "You stupid woman. I will destroy you. I will make sure that no employer in this city ever hires you again. I will ensure that every social service agency knows your name. I will bury you so deep that even the Mafia won't be able to find you." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "By tomorrow morning, you will be radioactive. And there's nothing anyone can do about it." She left. The door clicked shut. And the silence that followed had weight and dimensions and the quality of a countdown clock. That night, rain hammered against the window. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the radiator in the apartment had stopped working entirely. Vivien could see her breath. She could see it leaving her body and dissolving into the cold air. She sat on the edge of her bed and held the handwritten list of debts. Even with Lily's surgery paid for, she still owed $44,400 she had no possible way to repay. Marcus Webb had filed eviction papers. Cordelia Blackwood's fraud allegations would be public in hours. Every employer in Philadelphia believed she was a thief. Her late husband's family had disowned her. She was utterly alone. She walked to the bathroom. The bottle of sleeping pills the hospital had given her for insomnia sat on the shelf like an answer. She opened it. 23 pills rattled against the plastic. Enough to make everything stop hurting. Enough to make the cold disappear, the debt disappear, the feeling of absolute helplessness disappear. She poured them into her palm. The pills were small and white and clean. Then she heard Lily cough softly from the other room. It was barely audible. A small, wet sound. But it cut through the darkness like a knife cutting through paper. Vivien looked at the pills in her hand. She looked toward Lily's room. Slowly, deliberately, she poured them back into the bottle. Not tonight. Not ever. Her daughter needed her. Her daughter was alive because Vivien had thrown herself in front of a car. Her daughter was breathing because Vivien had not given up. Vivien called Moretti at 11 o'clock at night. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me everything," he said. She did. She told him about Marcus Webb's predation, about the other women she had learned about Cordelia Blackwood's threats and the fraud allegations, and the way her entire world was collapsing under the weight of lies that she could not fight. When she finished, there was silence on the line. "Leave this to me," Moretti said. 3 words. That was all. 2 phone calls changed everything. The first was to a federal prosecutor who owed Moretti a favor so profound that it had never truly been repaid. The second was to an investigative journalist at Philadelphia's largest news station, a woman who had been waiting for an opportunity like this for years. Within 48 hours, the city's machinery began to move. Marcus Webb was arrested at dawn. FBI agents came to his house in the suburbs with federal warrants and handcuffs and the absolute authority of the United States government. Housing discrimination. Extortion. Racketeering. Sexual coercion of tenants. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded phone calls, witness testimonies from 6 other women he had victimized, financial records showing bribes to local police. Marcus collapsed on his knees in his bathrobe, trembling like an animal in a cage, begging for mercy. The agents ignored him. Cameras filmed his arrest. By 9 in the morning, his face was on every news channel. Cordelia Blackwood was exposed on live television during the evening news broadcast. The journalist presented evidence methodically, like laying out cards in a rigged game. Falsified construction safety reports. Blame manufactured and placed on a dead man. A campaign of defamation orchestrated against his widow. Emails. Financial payments to employers. Testimony from her own assistant, a young woman who had finally found the courage to speak. Cordelia's entire social circle abandoned her overnight. The company she owned began hemorrhaging value. Federal investigators opened a criminal case. 3 days later, she was arrested at a charity gala, led away in handcuffs while camera flashes exploded like gunfire, and she screamed that this was a mistake, that she had powerful friends, that no one should dare touch her. No one helped her. Justice is not death. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. Justice is systematic and total and public. Marcus Webb received 40 years in federal prison. Cordelia Blackwood received 32 years for fraud and obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Both lost everything. Their wealth meant nothing. Their reputations were ash. Their freedom was gone. And Vivien Vasquez was finally free. 9 months had passed since the blizzard on the mountain lodge, since Vivien Vasquez had thrown herself in front of a car and landed in the orbit of the most dangerous man in Philadelphia. 9 months of silence. 9 months of absence. But what no one could see was the architecture of protection being constructed invisibly around her life, brick by brick, decision by decision, every door opening because Giovanni Moretti had whispered a single name to the right people. The rent was always paid on time now. An anonymous deposit arrived on the 1st of every month, exactly $1,200, exactly what she needed, never a dollar more. Vivien told herself she did not know who sent it. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. But accepting help felt like accepting debt, and she could not carry one more weight on her shoulders. So she pretended the money came from nowhere and worked harder to earn it herself. Lily recovered completely. The surgery at Children's Hospital had been flawless. Dr. Patterson's hand steady as they repaired the chamber of her daughter's heart, stitched closed the hole that had been slowly stealing her future. 3 months post-operation, Lily started 2nd grade with a scar hidden beneath her shirt and a spirit that had never been broken. She came home talking about spelling words and recess and a boy named Tyler who shared his juice box with her, and Vivien would watch her daughter move through the world with an ease that still felt like a miracle. Vivien found honest work. Medical billing specialist at St. Mary's Hospital, the same place where Lily had been saved. She used the skills she had learned years ago, helping Daniel fill out paramedic paperwork during the early days when he still loved her. She made $2,400 a month. She set aside $800 for rent, $300 for groceries, $200 for utilities. She put $300 into savings. By the end of the first month, she had $300 in her account. By the end of the second month, $450. She was building something. Slowly, deliberately, with her own hands, she was rebuilding. The office was quiet on a Thursday afternoon when her supervisor called her in. Andrea Chen, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, sat behind her desk with a satisfied expression. "We're offering you a promotion," she said simply. "Senior billing analyst. $15,000 a year increase. You start Monday." Vivien felt the floor shift beneath her. "Why?" she asked. "I've only been here 2 months." "Because you're exceptional," Andrea said. "Because you learn faster than anyone I've hired in 10 years. Because you take complicated problems and solve them quietly without making a fuss. That's rarer than people think." She smiled. "You deserve this." Walking home that evening, Vivien passed the cemetery where Daniel was buried. She had not visited in months, too afraid to face the guilt of being relieved he was gone. But today she stopped at his grave, pulled dead leaves away from his headstone, and whispered something only he could hear: "I'm building a real life. Not the one you promised. A real one." 3 weeks later, Vivien sat at her kitchen table with a checkbook and a pen. She had saved $5,000. It represented 3 months of her new salary, every spare dollar she could manage. She wrote a check to Giovanni Moretti with shaking hands. Not because she owed him, she knew she could never repay that debt. But because accepting charity without offering something in return felt like accepting she was a victim. And she was no longer a victim. She mailed the check with a note written in careful letters, "For Lily's surgery. A partial debt repayment. Thank you for giving me the chance to save my own life." The check arrived back to her apartment 4 days later, unopened. In its place was a white envelope with her name written in handwriting that was forceful and precise. Inside, a single sentence: "You owe me nothing. You gave me my son's life. That is a debt I can never repay." No signature. Just that one sentence. But it broke something open in her chest, the place where she had been keeping score, tallying what she owed, measuring her worth against what had been given. She sat on her bed with the paper in her hands and cried in a way she had not allowed herself to cry in years. Not from despair. From the strange, terrifying freedom of being told she was enough. Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse office, Giovanni Moretti sat in the dark watching the sunset turn the Delaware River gold. His son slept in the apartment next door, healthy and whole, his small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of a child without fear. Enzo stood quietly by the window, waiting. He had been waiting for 9 months. "She sent money," Giovanni said finally. "I saw." Enzo's voice was careful. "She doesn't need to." "I know." Giovanni turned away from the window. In his eyes was something that had not been there in 15 years, something that looked like hope and terrified him. "Set up an account in her name. Put $50,000 in it. For emergencies. For her daughter's future." "Does she know it's from you?" Enzo asked. "No. And she will not find out." Giovanni's voice was final as a blade. "She is rebuilding on her own terms. I will not take that from her." 9 months became a year. October arrived with leaves the color of copper and gold. Vivien had never seen autumn quite like this before, she had been too busy surviving to notice beauty. But now she noticed. Now she stopped on the street sometimes just to watch the light change, to feel the cool air on her skin, to marvel at the simple fact that she was still alive and her daughter was running and laughing somewhere in the world. The Children's Hospital was hosting a charity gala. Donors and volunteers mingled in a ballroom decorated with crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths that cost more than Vivien's monthly salary. She was volunteering, helping coordinate the silent auction, organizing donation cards. She moved through the crowd in a dark blue dress she had bought at Target, not expensive, but clean and well-fitted. Her hair was long and dark and healthy again, her eyes no longer hollow with exhaustion. She was standing near the silent auction table, writing a donor's information into a ledger when she felt the air change. Not felt. Recognized. The same recognition that had seized her on a snowy mountain road when a car came too fast, and she understood, in her body before her mind, that danger required action. She looked up and across the ballroom, and there he was. Giovanni Moretti stood near the entrance, a man who looked like he could own a city just by walking into it. He wore a suit that was impossibly black, impossibly tailored, his white shirt open at the collar revealing the column of his throat. His hair was dark and silvered at the temples. There was a scar running from his right eye to his cheekbone, pale and precise like a blade drawn by a steady hand. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, storm gray, watching her across a room full of people as if she was the only person he could see. He had not moved. He simply looked at her, and in that look was 9 months of protecting her from the shadows. Every good thing that had happened. Every door opening. Every deposit arriving at precisely the right moment. Every impossible coincidence that suddenly seemed very much like a plan. Their eyes held across the distance. The room full of people fell away. Then he moved. He walked toward her with the deliberate, controlled movement of a man who had learned long ago that power does not need to hurry. His Lieutenant Vinny followed 2 steps behind, his face carefully blank. But Giovanni stopped 3 feet away from Vivien and did something she had never seen him do before. He smiled. Not the thin smile of a man used to command. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and softened the scar on his face. "Vivien Vasquez," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "I did not expect to see you here." "I volunteer," she said, and her voice was steady. She had learned steadiness. "The hospital saved my daughter's life. I want to help them save others. A worthy cause." He stood before her like a supplicant before a shrine. "Would you allow me to make a donation?" "Of course." She gestured to the forms on the table. "How much would you like to contribute?" $50,000, he said simply. "In the name of Lily Vasquez. For the pediatric cardiac unit." Vivien felt the breath leave her body. $50,000. More money than she would earn in 20 years. Donated in her daughter's name. Donated in public where everyone could see it, could write about it, could know. "Why?" she whispered. Giovanni Moretti looked at her for a long moment. "Because you taught me that true power is not about control," he said quietly. "It is about choosing when to be merciful and when to be ruthless. You gave me my son's life when you had nothing. Let me give something back." "I didn't save your son for a reward," Vivien said. "I know." His eyes were unbearably gentle. "That is why I am giving it." They stood in the crowded ballroom surrounded by people who did not understand what was happening between them. Vivien saw Vinny exchange a look with another man in a dark suit. She saw the subtle phone calls, the quiet coordination, the machinery of power rearranging itself around a moment that felt impossibly small and impossibly large all at once. "Would you have coffee with me?" Giovanni asked. "Not as the man who helped you. Not as the man you saved. Just as myself. A man who would like to know you." Vivien thought of the blizzard. She thought of her daughter's laughter. She thought of the mountain road and the impossible choice she had made to save a child she did not know. She thought of 9 months of protection arriving anonymously, silently, without demand or condition. She thought of standing in her own power, no longer small, no longer invisible, no longer desperate. "Just coffee," she said. "Just coffee," he agreed. Behind them, in the silent auction, a child's drawing of a heart was being bid on by a woman who had no idea that the drawing had been made by the son of the most dangerous man in Philadelphia. No idea that the heart in the drawing was the same heart that a widow had saved on a snowy road. No idea that miracles come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest power is knowing when to kneel. The autumn light through the ballroom windows turned everything gold. Vivien Vasquez, who had once stood in the freezing Philadelphia winter with $2 in her pocket and a handwritten list of debts that never ended, now stood in a room full of light with a man who had learned to see her not as someone to save, but as someone worth standing beside. And what happened next was something no one could explain, except that after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe to our channel because tomorrow we have another story that will leave you speechless. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done in Vivien's position. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful act is not revenge, but choosing to rebuild when everything has fallen apart. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.